Hey everyone, John from Nintendo Life here, and I'm joined by my broadly talented and all-knowing team, including Xeon! Hey Xeon!
I know so much about this topic, I'm so excited!
And we have Alex! Hey Alex!
Hey, I think I'm the one who initially suggested this, so I'm supposed to be the knowledgeable one.
It feels like ever since the Switch launched nearly 4 years ago, there have been rumblings of a Switch Pro. And technology has advanced to the point where the Pro is more exciting than ever. So NVIDIA have given us this new technology called DLSS, and this basically allows us to take lower resolutions and magically, using algorithms and AI learning, take them up to much higher resolutions. Now of course it's far more technical than that, and maybe Alex can explain it even better than I can, if that's even possible.
Well, I'm by no means an expert. Sort of the technical side of things isn't really the point of this channel, but I've done a little bit of research and I've become a little bit more knowledgeable than I was. And basically what it does is that when an image is rendered, obviously the computer can see all the tries and all the 3D models in essentially a vector, but we never see that side of things because that would be ludicrously expensive to produce. So instead it takes a little snapshot of what should be there, it looks at all the colors and let's say it's 30% red and 70% green, it would render that as a green pixel because it's mostly green. So it goes, okay, this is going to be a green pixel. And that is how basic graphics are made. However, with something like super sampling and indeed anti-aliasing, it kind of, rather than just sampling it once, it samples it lots of times, and in the case of DLSS, rather than sampling the area once and going, yep, it's a majority this color, it samples it a whopping 64 times, and then makes a decision based on 64 individual values, and comes up with something in the middle. And I mean, that sounds like it would be hugely, hugely expensive to do in terms of performance. But it isn't, because DLSS runs on dedicated circuitry. This is the area I'm not quite so clear, but what I believe is that there are dedicated chips, for lack of a better term, that will do a lot of that heavy lifting on the fly. They're designed specifically to do that, and so it takes away a lot of the work for doing such a thing from the graphics processing itself. Then, by using deep learning, which is the DL part of DLSS, the machine is therefore able to work out what should be there by using a load of example images that it has stored in its bodkin, which is a...
The bodkin is my favorite part of the GPU.
And so therefore it can make an educated guess as to what should be there if it were rendering at a higher resolution, and then output it, but the game itself is running at a lower resolution, which means that it doesn't take as much computing power to produce, which means you get better performance.
So if that went over your head, because that's a lot of words, just to make it very, very simple, PC games like Control have been doing this for a little while now. So you can basically take Control, put it in 1080p, but using DLSS, it can become essentially a 4K game. And why that's exciting is because this is NVIDIA technology. So current PC builds, if they're using AMD cards, they can't use this. But NVIDIA also make the Tegra found in the Switch. And there's a very high chance that when the Switch Pro comes along, it could utilize DLSS. Meaning, we could take games like Breath of the Wild, which run at around 900p on a standard Switch. That could potentially become 4K without needing really high-powered chips within the Switch.
In fact, we already see it in a Tegra in the NVIDIA Shield, the latest one. Digital Foundry have done an excellent video on this. They are the guys to talk to if you want to get in really deep about DLSS. And it uses that kind of AI upscaling, a little bit more basic in comparison to the stuff that we see in things like Control, but it shows that it is entirely possible on a mobile chipset like the Tegra in the Switch. And I mean, realistically, the Tegra that we've got in the Switch at the moment was already a little bit old when the Switch was launched. So, yes, that's kind of Nintendo's philosophy. But that means that the jump that we could in theory have could be pretty special.
And it's not like this is just some simple upscaling either, kind of like you were saying. The examples that you guys sort of shared with me yesterday were pretty mind-blowing. Didn't I can't remember exactly, but it looked like the upscaling or the DDR4 Max Revolution LSS that you guys were talking about. It almost looked better than native 4K. Am I speaking correctly?
Yeah. So I want to give I want to put up an example image now, which I'm sure Digital Foundry won't mind us using because they're the ones who created it, and we're crediting them. As I say, this, as you can see here, is a comparison between a DLSS 1080p image from Control and a native 4K. And the DLSS arguably looks even more detailed than a native resolution. It is that blooming clever. There are downsides, of course, you know, sometimes you can get artifacting and things like that, but realistically, the latest version of DLSS, which is 2.0, is frankly out of this world. And if a Switch Pro could utilize this, my word, the sky's the limit.
It's crazy seeing the performance gain you get too outside of just resolution. A game running in native 4K and DLSS 4K, I've seen differences of between 60 frames per second to 100 frames per second. And that's almost double the frame rate. So not only can you get better resolutions, but you can get much better performance as a whole. And a lot of Switch games kind of need that. Like if you look at some games like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, the resolution can get very low, especially in handheld mode in some towns. Imagine that just magically being fixed with a DLSS patch.
And all of these patches as well will have to be manually added by the developers, right? As well, it's not like just if the Switch Pro has this, every game will just suddenly be fixed, right?
In its current state, yeah. I mean, who knows what the future may bring? There may be some blanket thing they could do, but that's not, as far as I'm aware, that's not possible yet. It has to be something that has to be done, you know, like in game specific. So it's not like you can just buy a Switch Pro, you know, this theoretical one with DLSS, stick in, I don't know, Sonic Forces or something, and suddenly have it look, you know, twice as good. It's not going to work like that.
It just plays better.
Yes. No. It's something the developers will have to activate, which is a bit of a limitation, but by no means a significant one. You know, I mean, certainly when it comes to games like some of the big ports like the Doom games, my goodness, if you could get a better resolution out of that, I think overall for a portable system, I think it runs brilliantly. But imagine if you could get it looking slightly better than that, but maybe at 60 frames a second because it's rendering the image at like 360p or something, which I know sounds ridiculous and sounds like it would look awful, but certainly on a handheld screen as well, it would look more than adequate, and then running at double the frames, that's trouser-tighteningly exciting.
And I don't feel like that's out of the question for Nintendo or even, you know, their developers as well, because it would definitely help sell people on a Switch Pro to know that their past games are now running at a better resolution and better frame rate. And Nintendo's even gone in themselves in the past to sort of upgrade their games. I mean, this is a slightly different example, but Animal Crossing New Leaf came out with their Welcome Amiibo DLC. What was it, 4 or 6 years after the game had already been out? And granted, that is a sort of game that kind of it has a very long shelf life. It'd be exciting to see what kind of games Nintendo would go take, kind of like you were saying, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, maybe Breath of the Wild, the base, you know, just standard Breath of the Wild, kind of like what you saw or what you showed off in that video you just did yesterday or the day before, or whenever this goes out, rather, I should say. But yeah, it's exciting to know that hopefully Nintendo would be game for making their old games look a little bit better. It
is exciting, because up until now, my expectations for the Switch Pro have been very low. Because at the end of the day, the Switch is still a mobile unit. The majority of its innards is a battery. When people have been throwing out the term 4K with this thing, I've just been thinking a handheld can't possibly do that. But with DLSS, it is possible now, and we can get real performance gain both in handheld and docked, without really sacrificing battery life either.
And that's another really big thing, is battery life, because although 4K on a mobile unit isn't out of the question, it's incredibly intensive. It's hugely intensive. And when you're running from, a standard, wall plug, that's no problem. You got as much power as you need, but as in physical electricity. But when you've got a battery and that becomes a resource, you need to be aware of that as well. And this allows it. Like, it almost feels like cheating. Like, honestly, it almost feels like, all the optimization and everything the devs do, and they get these games working, and then NVIDIA go, hey, you could render that at a lower resolution and have it look better than you do at the moment. Sorry. It's just...
We can?
It's magic, honestly, and this is one of the, most exciting things to do with AI and, sort of deep learning and things like that. At least from our perspective, because we're nerds, but specific nerds.
I guess another exciting thing is too, the PS5 and Series X are both AMD powered, so they may get similar tech down the line, but as of right now, there's nothing really like this on those platforms. And I'm not going to say that the Switch is going to rival PS5 in graphics, but I am saying it's going to get a heck of a lot closer if this comes to fruition.
Yeah, and that's a good point, especially now that we have the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. Nintendo is so behind in the graphical department, at least. Yeah, so this would be the leg up that they really need.
And it would allow them to directly compete. I mean, nobody's going to be, sort of thinking, oh, well, the Series X looks better, therefore I'm going to get... Well, some people probably will say that, but nobody's going to expect a mobile unit to look as good as those absolute behemoths in the same way that they don't with the Switch now. But the Switch is starting graphically to show its age, whilst before it was kind of acceptable. It was, 4 years ago or something like that? And now, it's 4 years, and now especially that we are aware of this technology, it sort of raises the question as to why Nintendo, why haven't you done this yet? But who knows, maybe they are in the process of doing that. But what's also exciting is what else we could expect from a Switch Pro. I'm gonna say, even though I know John opened this video, Xeon, what would you like to see in a Switch Pro aside from Dulles?
So I'm pretty content with my Switch as a whole, generally. I mean, there are, the occasional times where, like, I just started Paradise Killer, thanks to a recommendation from Liam over at Push Square, and it's very much my kind of game. And but when you play in handheld mode, there are some noticeable graphical differences between docked and handheld, and I would almost love to see the game running on a PS4. Recently, I went and played Nier Automata thanks to John and Ryan and lots of recommendations. And after playing that on PS4, on a PS4 Pro, and then going back to Switch, you can really kind of see the differences. So of course graphics would be a big thing, but otherwise I don't really have a whole lot that I'm disappointed with or would like changes. One of the biggest things though would be somehow to change the UI, give us themes, give us more customization options. But if we have better hardware, hopefully they can make the system or make the UI just as snappy. Because I think if we do end up getting some of those additional features to customize our home menu, I think sacrificing the speediness of it would be not really worth it in the end, because I love how you can just turn on the Switch, you can browse all your games, you can hop into your friends list, and it's all super fast, except for the eShop. The eShop is just such a slug, in my opinion. I don't know how, maybe my internet's just bad.
No, it's the same for everyone, unfortunately.
Okay. And I swear, I mean, I don't have any physical evidence, but I swear that the Switch eShop used to be so fast. And maybe it's because there's a million games on it now, or whatever, 500,000, I don't know. Obviously, that's not a real number. But maybe that's what slowed it down.
I'm fairly certain 500,000 is a real number, Zeal.
Well, not in this equation here. It's that's all I meant. But otherwise I don't have a whole lot I want. What about you guys? What would you love to see?
Well, this is still kind of on the performance front, but it's quite jarring to go from a PS5 game like Demon's Souls, which loads so quickly, to Switch. Like, you play Animal Crossing New Horizons, and loading that game up takes forever. Going into a house takes, multiple seconds. It's just this jarring disconnect between playing and waiting, which happens quite often. Assuming this is more than just DLSS, which it probably will be, there's a good chance that Switch games could load a lot faster on this thing.
Do you think that there's a chance that we would get like an SSD on a Switch, like just a little tiny, like a 64 gigabyte SSD because it's Nintendo?
Well, you say that, I've literally just thought to myself, what kind of SSDs can you get that are really tiny? They exist. I just happened to have found one here. It's diddly. I don't quite know how to describe its size. I could take a guess and say that it's about maybe 5 centimeters long by maybe about 6 centimeters wide. I don't know what the standard thickness is, but it's tiny. That could fit in a portable unit. I mean, it's arguably maybe overkill, and maybe they could do some sort of hybrid memory, but then you start coming into things like proprietary systems, which are hugely expensive, and whilst Nintendo can afford it, it may well be cheaper to go with an off-the-shelf item. Not that they often do, but stranger things have happened. The Tegra is technically off the shelf.
And there'll still be the compromise of microSD cards. Like, if you're using an SSD, you'd have to just put certain games on there, and then the stuff on the microSD card would basically load as fast as it usually would. But they can still improve loading times through other means, but that's just one thing I really want to see improved. And I guess one other thing, and I'm not sure I'm going to steal this from you, Alex, I don't know if you're thinking about this, but there's something that isn't done on a system level. One thing I want to see is an Ethernet port on the back of the unit. Very few Switch owners actually use the USB to Ethernet adapter. I want to see one just put onto the actual dock itself.
Yeah, I agree. I actually must admit, I've generally been rather fond of the dock overall. I know a lot of people have ragged on it for being so big and everything, but when the Switch is in there, it's secure, it's safe, it's not going to fall over or anything like that. And I know there was the thing people have said about it scratching the screens, which I've never, ever had. But, each to their own. Everyone has their own experiences. I'm not, here to poo-poo that. But at the same time, I'm actually overall quite fond of the dock. I would like a smaller one as an alternative as well for, taking it on the go. But at the same time, I think the dock is pretty good overall. I would just yes, John, you're absolutely right. I'd like an Ethernet port. Just stick one on there. There's a USB port at the back, which I don't think is generally used for anything except Ethernet. In fact, nobody has ever used that for anything except Ethernet. I'm saying it, and nobody can prove otherwise. Please prove me wrong in the comments below. But no, seriously, an Ethernet port would be a big, big boon, because I really like using wired internet for stuff like Smash, and having a dongle it's fine, but it just sort of feels like, why should I have to buy a dongle? Why should I have to have this weird chunky thing flapping around at the back?
And few people are going to use it. It's only the enthusiasts that buy a dongle.
And does Nintendo even sell their own officially licensed Switch dongles either? Or because I have one from the days of the Wii and the Wii U, and I've heard that those work, but
they have a licensed one, a Hori one, yeah.
Okay.
And in terms of the Switch hardware itself, I would like to see a more attractive bezel. As it looks right now, it's fine, but I think it'd look far more attractive if the screen kind of occupied the majority of what you're holding.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think I know the reason why they've done that, of course. I think it's because it needs to be robust, and that's kind of really high up on Nintendo's list. And a bezel means that's, border for the screen to not be exposed to damaging bits like the ground. And I think that's generally why that bezel is there. I can't see them going for a bezel-less design or anything even close, but I certainly wouldn't say no to a slimmer bezel. Maybe reinforce it with steel or concrete or something like that.
Then they can have a Minecraft brick special edition on launch. So my hands I think they're pretty average sized. I don't know, I'm holding my hands up in our video right now, but nobody else could see that. But I've been always pretty content with the actual Joy-Con themselves, and I know things like the Hori Split Pad Pro exist for bigger hands. And Alex, you've got kind of a sort of bulkier grip on your Switch that kind of gives you more to hold on to. But until I finally recently, I know 3.5 years into the Switch, I finally got my hands on a Pro controller, and it has changed my life, especially playing anything where you have to like third-person aiming in Breath of the Wild or an FPS, anything like that, my mind has been blown. I can't play on a standard Switch now, and that was kind of the thing I've always worried about. But so my question is, if they do a Switch Pro, would you like to see Nintendo make some new controller as well to kind of amplify the Pro name of the Switch itself? Or yeah, what do you guys think? Because I would like to see them, toss their hat in the ring. I think the Split Pad Pro is a nice addition, but it's still missing some of those features that official Nintendo Joy-Cons have.
I find it tricky because I really like the Joy-Con overall. I think, whilst I don't find it comfortable in handheld mode, I think that, in terms of the multifunctionality of them, I think they're really, really well designed. But suffice it to say, I've got quite large hands, and so they aren't comfortable to use in handheld mode. They're okay in a grip and everything, but yeah, they're just not comfortable for me to use. I feel like I'm constantly clawing around the system, and I don't have anywhere to put all my fingers. And as a result, I wouldn't turn away such an idea. But at the same time, you're making a portable system, and it needs to ideally maintain functionality with things like, well, I suppose even Labo and things like that. I mean, maybe a bit of a stretch. Maybe everyone else has forgotten about Labo except me, and even I've forgotten about Labo. Whilst we may get slightly more sort of like with better like signal and stuff like that, better wireless technology, in terms of the Joy-Con, I imagine that in terms of their footprint, they're probably going to stay the same. And to be honest, even though it's potentially a negative for me, I think that's probably the right call, because they've built up their ecosystem around the Joy-Con, and I think they'd be shooting themselves in the foot if they were to change that. Maybe make it so they don't drift, but apart from that.
That's what I was going to touch on. I completely agree with you. And I've had pretty good luck with my Joy-Con. I've not had one that's really drifted or faulted, had a fault in any way. But I'm not going to ignore the vast amounts of proof and evidence of so many people having bad experiences with their Joy-Con. So if anything, just refining it would be a great way to go, like a version 2. So it looks the same, it basically functions the same, but it has better connection, has less drift, maybe even a better battery life. Not that the battery life's really an issue, but if you're going to improve stuff, why not?
Yeah, I mean, the Pro Controller is absolutely... I love the battery life on the Pro Controller. Every time I try and play something on my PS4, I'm just like, oh yeah, I'll sit down, and it's like PS4, DualShock 4 battery low, and it gets under my skin so much. And I felt that the PS5 is not only no better, but maybe slightly worse. And and then you got the Xbox One controller, and the Xbox Series X controller, and the Xbox Series S controller, and the Xbox One X controller. It's the same controller, and they take bloody double A's. It's 2021. I think it was recently revealed that it was like a deal with Duracell that they have.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Which is just hilarious.
I do appreciate the idea that, double A's are what you use, because then you never have to worry about, like, if your battery just stops working, you don't have to, like, crack it back open and replace, like, batteries
but
you always have.
You've got to worry about having double A's.
But you can have chargeable batteries. Rechargeable double A's. Or you can get a charge
pack.
Plug
the bloody controller in. You can't really do that with a PS4 either. You can't plug it in and charge it on anything. Except I've got because it's like, oh, now I only take certain milliamps. And most USB protocols don't allow that. They're too dumb, and it doesn't let them know. So it's just, just not going to charge, not going to charge. It tells you to plug it into the system like, you happen to sit next to your system, which is nonsense. I've got a plug that it does work on, though, which I'm very happy about. We're getting slightly off topic.
PS4 is the first system I have ever owned a charging dock for and have had success, but it's also the only system I felt like I've ever needed one for. And I know this is getting off topic, but I love if I didn't have my charging dock, my PS4 controllers would never be charged.
To close this battery talk, the Wii U gamepad, you need to plug it into the wall to charge it, and it lasts like an hour. Anyway, let's get back to the Switch Pro.
What a note to end that on. Thanks for bringing it just right back around.
I would actually like to bring up the idea of the Pro Controller with the Switch Pro. I wouldn't mind a Switch Pro Controller. I really hope they don't call it that, but they'll probably call it something like the new Switch Pro Controller. Yeah. But what I would really like, the battery life on it, fantastic. I wouldn't mind it being longer like the Wii U Pro controller because that was ludicrous, but it's more than serviceable, more than acceptable. I can't fault the battery life. What I would like, though, I would like a headphone port on it. It's not something that I would use, to be honest, because I generally don't play anything with headphones as a general rule. Sometimes I do, but it's very, very rare. But I know that for a lot of people, that's a really, important thing. And come on, it doesn't have to be crystal clear to be going into just some headphones you're sticking into your controller. You can use an older Bluetooth protocol and it would be absolutely fine. It wouldn't, be too disruptive. And, with battery technology improving, may not even lose any battery life. And I also like the weight of the Pro controller. Keep that the same, please. But yeah, apart from that, I think that's the only thing that I would change about the Pro controller with a quote-unquote Switch Pro. And that wouldn't have to come with a Switch Pro, of course, but since we're on the topic of batteries.
Yeah, I love the headphone jack in other controllers. It's so cool to have like a baby in one arm and just mute the TV and have all the volume just come out of these headphones. It's so good. One thing I'm actually thinking about as well is, could the Switch Pro potentially tie in some Switch Online stuff into the system itself? Because they want to minimize the output of the OS on the regular Switch. But if we have more RAM to play with, could it be possible to have voice chat from the system rather than a mobile app? Maybe even integrating the mobile app into some kind of interface within the OS.
I have said for the longest time that I don't think the idea of a mobile app is inherently a bad one. It's just the execution that Nintendo took was absolute nonsense, frankly. It was terrible, terrible execution. But the idea, as long as it could communicate in the same way that the Switch Online app can communicate with Animal Crossing, the fact that it can do that communication, you can actually have that interaction. If it went both ways, so you could do stuff with the Switch, like adjust volume or invite someone to the chat, but it was still just coming through your phone, and it was just essentially a conduit, I think that would be absolutely fantastic, because everyone's only using Discord anyway. Let's not deny it. When they're chatting with friends online, why not just have a system like that, but actually have functionality within the Switch UI as well? So even if it's just, as I say, like inviting people and stuff like that, and you could use your phone to like type messages to people through the Switch, online, through your Switch itself, and have a messaging system that way. There is so much potential with it, and they really did a phenomenal task of completely ballsing up every single aspect of it.
So one thing for me is, now we're in the age where our phones can do everything. We can take photos on it. We can go on the internet. We can still call people, but we can also play games. And I think, having a system like the Switch just goes to show that, phones aren't going to be everything for us. And with the online chatting, I've never really been a person that has, I don't play a ton of games online anyways, but I've never really enjoyed chatting on my phone. I love it as an option, but I wish that I could kind of like you guys said, just plug in a headset and just talk to someone through my Switch. Have a party going. Someone new comes to my island, and sure, they're not in our Discord server, but now we can just chat. We can just chat through the voice chat just with the controller. It'd be so nice just to make it easier, because then I don't have to worry about having my phone be alive or plug in my iPhone lightning cable adapter to my headset, or even find where I left it. It's just so many more things, so many more steps and things to worry about. And yeah, it would just be so nice if Nintendo managed to just cram that all into the Switch. I would love that. Please do that. Thank you.
The only other major thing that I can think of that I would really want is maybe not even necessarily 1080p, but a slightly higher resolution screen for the Switch. I think the Switch Lite, if there's a Switch Pro Lite, which that's another can of worms we can look into maybe in the future, but maybe not.
We've got new 2DS XL.
The possibilities are endless. I think 720p looks great on the Switch Lite. It is just like, it's the perfect size for that resolution. But the Switch standard model, whilst it's good, I think it could be slightly better. Even if in theory it was like a 900p screen. Not quite 1080p. It doesn't have to be. But I think if it was just that little bit better with the largest screen size, certainly if the Switch Pro has less of a bezel but has the same footprint, it's going to be a bigger screen again. I think just a slight resolution bump on the built-in screen could work wonders.
725.
There you go.
Just right there. That's all we need.
One final point from me is, do you think this is going to badly reflect on the vanilla Switch? Because if we have games that are being built for the Pro, let's say that they're being the internal resolution is 320p, and they're boosting it up to well above 1080p. It looks good on the Pro, but then the vanilla users, which are the majority of the user base, are going to suffer from that. So I guess my point is it better to view this thing as something that upgrades existing games, rather than bringing potential for brand new experiences that couldn't have been on the Switch in the first place?
So I think it's a tough gamble, because when you have games on the 3DS, for example, right? How we had new 3DS games only, or new 3DS XL, whatever they were exact. I think it was just new 3DS, like Xenoblade Chronicles, Xenoblade. Oh my gosh, what have you guys done to me? And Fire Emblem Warriors. I feel like it really could have hurt the saleability of the games on the shelves, because just so many people weren't able to play those games because they didn't have the hardware. And I think the best route would be to kind of just design the games kind of as the way they are, and then just upgrade them with that new chip, just so that way, because we don't want to see things like, I know Cyberpunk is a pretty severe example of that, but base vanilla Switch owners should not have to experience anything remotely close to that. And I think maybe that's kind of what has held Nintendo off on doing something like that for so long. Maybe I'm not sure if they necessarily felt the burn of it with the 3DS, but from an outsider's perspective, it seems like that could have had a big play on the kind of the end of the 3DS era. And they really didn't even do many games like that. So maybe they found that it just wasn't worth it in the end. But yeah, it is worrying, definitely, at the future of what would come with that.
I do think that, the new 3DS approach was the wrong way to go about it. And, maybe if they'd done things slightly differently, it could have worked. But at the end of the day, people were buying the 3DS and the new 3DS. The difference wasn't stark between them, but the 3DS must have been, to develop for, I'm sure, certainly for bigger games, infuriatingly limited. I mean, it was not a powerful system even when it was released. It was, that wasn't what they were going for, and, it was clearly hugely successful regardless. But it does mean that when you have that kind of, that want to have bigger and better games, it becomes very limited, extremely limiting. And I think that the base Switch as we have it now, is more than capable of hosting a lot of modern games. Not maybe like Cyberpunk 2077, but it's those are the fringe cases. Generally a lot of the games that are coming out now aren't trying to push the boundaries. You'll always get games that do, but a lot of the really celebrated games are even like indie games. Hollow Knight, you could run it on a biscuit. I mean, you can't, but it's not an intensive game, and yet what a game. And it doesn't feel retro or old by any stretch. So I don't think it's necessarily going to leave the original Switch behind if this is the road they go down. Incidentally, I've just realized we haven't actually officially properly said that the Switch Pro is only theorized at the moment. It's not confirmed. Just want to be clear on that.
Right.
I think if they made it so that games were always backwards compatible with the original Switch, even if, they maybe don't look so excellent or they don't run quite as perfectly, then I still think we're going to have a great time, because the Switch is a surprisingly capable system, and a Switch Pro, as long as it's not going to go too far, which from what we've described, it's not going to go too far into beefiness, I think that will work overall, as long as they don't start releasing loads and loads of games that are, Switch Pro exclusive. And I don't think they will, because that would be bad.
Well, I guess to end this off then, fellas, it sounds like we're not really expecting this unit to be packing a lot of extra tech, and at DLSS will probably do a lot of the heavy lifting. So with that taken into account, how expensive is this going to be? Like, Xeon, how much do you think this is going to be?
I think it's going to be tough for Nintendo to try and, because if they come out and they come out around, if they come out with a new system, they almost have to, in my opinion, reduce the price of the original lines just a little bit. But I think $400 would be a great spot. And because it's very close to the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, but it's still not. Well, because actually, is Xbox Series X am I forgetting? Is that 400 or is that 500?
I think they're both 500, and then Series S I think is 300.
Sure, but yeah, I think $400 would be a right spot, but. And then I think that, if they dropped maybe the Switch Lite down to $179, here in the US at least, granted, forget I'm using those numbers, but maybe drop $20 off of the Switch Lite and maybe $50 off of the standard Switch, because then they're still, they're not reducing the price that much, but they're still giving somewhat of a discount considering that the systems have been out for so long now.
I think if they sold the Lite for, as you say, about sort of $170, $180, if we're going to stay with dollars, and then the standard Switch for about $250, and then the Switch Pro for, I think $400 would maybe be a bit of an ask. I don't think they would necessarily sell too many units, but I think if they could get it for about $370, $350, I think, and, therefore in pounds, maybe $370, $350, because the universe hates us. I think that would be a good price. I think they would do well with that. Whether that's feasible with the Tegra that supports DLSS, that is another thing entirely. At the end of the day, we don't know how much, this machine that doesn't exist might cost. But I think from a consumer point of view, I would look at that and go, ooh, yeah, I think that's worth the upgrade.
It's, I think you both bring up great price points there, and I agree largely. But it depends what their strategy is with this thing. Like, are they gonna phase the existing Switch out and basically replace it with this? Because if so, they could price it very similarly, so that consumers go, hey, this is only like $30 more than the existing Switch, I may as well just go for that one. And it kind of adds more value to it without really actually adding the value. And we saw this with 3DS. Like, I'm pretty sure the 3DS XL quickly replaced the existing 3DS, and then with new 3DS XL, that replaced the normal 3DS XL. So it comes to a point where eventually they probably are going to phase some of the units out. Switch Lite's probably going to stick around, but I do think at some point the existing Switch will probably, at some point, leave the market.
That is a possibility, and I suppose it depends on how they, how well everyone views this. Is it going to be sort of an incremental upgrade like the Xbox One X or the PS4 Pro, or is it something more substantial? Is it essentially going to be Switch 2? Or, the naming conventions go, it's going to be called the Switch U.
Right, and the Switch almost seems like the kind of system where they could almost take like the Apple, the iPhone angle, and they could continue the Switch line for 10, 20 years and just continue releasing new iterations of it and selling them, hopefully not once every year.
Yeah, I hope this is their new base from now on, because it kind of sucks to lose all that backwards compatibility, and I get it. Switch is a completely different machine to the Wii or the Wii U. I understand that you can't put a disc in this thing, but I'd love for the games that we're buying now to basically carry with us forever, kind of like what Xbox is doing right now. And I never expect Nintendo to return to the console business, as in like a dedicated machine, because there's no point competing with that. They may as well do their own thing with the hybrid machine.
Yeah, I think they've cornered the market, and they've clearly showed that the market for this kind of thing, even though I think many people, when they first saw the Switch, would maybe think, well, why don't I just use a phone? I'm not suggesting that anyone in the comments would necessarily have said that, but, I'm sure there are people who did, because, at the end of the day, it's a mobile device that you can play games on. Why would you buy a Switch? It's expensive. But I do think that there's clearly a market for it. It's kind of bridging that gap between convenience and portability and actually having real, proper, heavy games rather than Candy Crush. Other mobile games are available.
Well, Alex, isn't Genshin Impact on mobile, or is that just PS4 that I'm thinking of?
No, I think that is on. I think
it is on mobile.
Yeah, I think that is a mobile game as well.
They got games. Everyone can have games on their phone now. Real games.
If the Switch is just the Switch going from here on in without being generational, I can see a big impact on games as well. Because it feels like when we're in the middle of a generation, you often hear like, oh, we're making the next Mario for the next console. It's like, but I kind of want more Marios for this console. So it'd be great just to have everything just carry with you and just be the Switch.
Yeah, and you'll often see games too absolutely suffer because they came out at the end of a console's life, and it could be. I'm blanking on a great example, right now, but it also helps to the rarity of games, and it's not really fair to the
Terranigma.
Oh yeah, and we never got that in the West here actually. I've heard wonders of it, but yeah, exactly that.
I'm sorry. Is the United Kingdom not the West now?
Well, my Western, sorry, the U.S. Yeah, I won't go into that.
Just because you're in Oregon, you're about as far west as you can get.
The Wild West, baby.
Yeah, I'm talking about the Wild West. We didn't get that over here. Yeah. But yeah, it would be great to kind of remove that problem from the equation, because it's not fair that to developers that have put in the time and effort to make their games what they are, or suddenly Nintendo or whoever just suddenly announces, oh, we're making the next gaming console, everybody jump on board, leave your other ones behind. So yeah, that'd be nice.
Well, I think we've discussed a lot of potential improvements, and guys, I'm more excited than ever for this thing. So before we end off, where is your excitement level for the Switch Pro? On a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you for this theoretical thing?
I would say around about an 8, but that's only because I'm quite tired.
I'd probably say the potential is nice. It's and it's kind of just a matter of time, right? But I'd probably say like a 6 or a 7, just because I'm still really enjoying the life of my Switch. But at the same time, I know there's a lot more we could be doing with it, right?
No, you know what? I've changed my mind. I'm gonna put it at a 9 because I've just remembered Breath of the Wild in 4K, and that thing was very tasty, like very tasty.
I was going to go on the same note. I don't feel like I desperately need a Switch Pro, but seeing that thing, I desire it now. So I'd put myself around 8. Alright, well, I guess on that note, thank you so much for watching, and if you want to tell us your thoughts on the Switch Pro, whether you think it's real, how much you think it's going to cost, and your desires for it, then let us know down in the comments below, and be sure to go to that subscribe button and make it a pro subscribe button, which means you have to press it with 5 alt accounts. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
A wandering minstrel lie, maybe.